After reading Body Ritual Among the Nacirema by H. Miner, I had a lot of different thoughts and feelings going through my mind. One of the biggest challenges I came across was the fact that my brain was attempting to process the information that I was reading through a modern lens, trying to associate it with the way that we live in the modern day United States. But I did need to remind myself a lot that despite the fact that we share a continent on which we live, this is a completely different way of life from what we know and accept as normal. Upon doing some additional research, though, I was very interested to find out that although we view these cultures as very primitive, there were people within the cultures that were utilizing technology such as television back at the time when Miner was conducting this research. Looking to the United States and some of the rituals that we see as commonplace, one that I found that is not shared by all of the world, but we put a lot of emphasis on, are baby showers and the receiving of gifts at them. While other Western countries do participate in these, lots of cultures have rituals that surround the birth of a child, but many do believe that giving gifts and celebrating the birth of the child before it is actually here is unlucky for fear that the child may not survive. However, with our access to modern medicine in the United States, there's generally less concern in that regard for the fear of the child, and we can confidently celebrate them before they arrive earthside. We utilize this opportunity to celebrate both the child and the parents, especially with an emphasis put on the mothers. And these celebrations are typically associated with a church or religious group as well, since the celebration is one of life and creation. When we look at the Nacirema and compare this to some of the aspects of their own culture, we do see a very large difference. They viewed things such as intercourse and pregnancy as something that needed to be very scheduled and was not something that was celebrated by the people within their community. Mothers were not regularly seen nursing their children, assuming that there were most likely some member of the religious groups that would help take care of the child. We're not given too much insight onto the reasoning behind all of this, but it is very interesting that because of all the other sadistic tendencies that we see throughout this culture, with different afflictions for involving pain throughout daily life, that pregnancy would not be put up higher on the list of things that they do push for within their community. The only thing we can assume is that because of their emphasis on body image and trying to perfect the human body based on their religious beliefs, they would see the effects on the female body as counterproductive to the end goal for their people. Back in the 1950s, when the United States saw baby showers become very commonplace, these were a very small, intimate affair, typically only with 10 people or so being in attendance at a time. Most women would have multiple parties to involve more of their friends, but they would keep these different social groups exclusive to one party or another. So, for instance, you would have one for friends, one for family, one for coworkers, and so on. As we entered the 1960s, these parties became a much more laid-back gathering. People were not seen dressing up for them as much. They would come wearing very casual clothing, such as jeans and tie-dye t-shirts. But to offset that, we do see the gifts becoming more and more lavish and expensive, and people turning their nose up almost at hand-me-down gifts, whereas previously these were seen as fine to do, as it was more sustainable and made more sense to pass along gently used items from one family to the next. As we closed out the 70s and started our way into the 80s, the gifts started to become almost too expensive, making these gatherings more of a chore for people to attend, as babies needed more and more devices and products to help get them through their infancy, such as car seats, high chairs, and things of that nature. However, in opposite of that, we do see that there's an increase in more choices on the food side when at these gatherings. So we began to provide more exotic foods. Different snacks became more available at grocery stores, whereas previously all we saw at these were more tea time snacks such as small sandwiches, crackers, and a few beverages. As we approached the new millennium, women, of course, began to become more privy to the idea that smoking and drinking were detrimental and harmful to the baby. So these activities were pretty much taken out of parties. If they were included, people would go outside and smoke, or it was women other than the one being celebrated that would do the drinking. Men also began to find themselves invited to these parties, meaning that guest lists became much larger. Because of this, this brought back the more common tradition that we know of now, where there are a lot of games and ice-breaking activities to help everyone get to know one another and create a social network that allows parents to work off of one another as they move about raising their own child. With all of these changes that occurred over the decades, it helped take baby showers from more of an elitist activity only allowed to the rich white populations and offer it as something that was a more inclusive activity where both men and women were included and became more accessible to people of all different social classes. This is also this is all for the best, of course, as it gives women more of a chance to celebrate one of the biggest moments in their lives, as they should be. Taya Miles, a contributor for the Huffington Post, does point out that these activities also allow for new parents to create that social network I mentioned before, and rely on more experienced parents as they journey down this path for themselves in the first time. So with all this being said, we do have cultural rituals of our own here in what we would consider modern America compared to those of the Nacirema peoples. However, they are a much more civilized type of ritual and are seen as a far more accepted practice as compared to some of the ones that we read about there from H minor.